assuming, right? But
Okay.
I think you should play the same amount of hours as every other lane, and I think you can play less if you go watch other VODs.
But I think, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I also think it might be something that's easily affected by team environment, like you said, because you do have to exchange a lot of information with your laners. Like, okay, if you're playing this matchup, I go to your lane at one time and things like this. So I think that's fair to say, like, if the team isn't talking as much, maybe there's something like that. It doesn't necessarily feel like that, but that might be the case.
I mean, it also happens in some teams where a jungler like has maybe a grudge with someone on the team, and they actually don't really like ganking that lane, for example,
Sure.
or helping that lane, and because they don't have that much synergy, because they're not maybe the greatest of friends, or they don't get along very well. I mean, that happens as well. I've seen that a couple of times. It doesn't probably happen as much anymore because it's a bit more professional now than it used to be, but I've seen it happen before, definitely.
Oh, the most ridiculous
Definitely
example
never.
ever. The most ridiculous example ever is one of the most successful European teams of all time. It's obviously Moscow 5 Gambit, right?
Yeah.
And no joke, the reason why Diamond Prox used to just gank the top lane all day long has nothing to do with him thinking that Darien was going to win his lane and that that's the correct, meta approach to winning the game. It's purely because he was friends with Darien and he didn't like Genji or something mental like that. Like, what? And they were like actually a top team at the time. Like, I realize it's a few years back. That's such a mental concept, though.
Yeah.
That would be like if you were watching some like sick Korean team. You were like, oh, what's the logic here? Why do you always gank for that guy's lane? You're just like, fuck that other guy. Just don't like him. Up, sound.
When I was in Meteor Makers, I worked with Horo from SKT, and he was very eager to learn English. He was always using his translator. Whenever he was talking with me, it was pretty much translator. Then he showed it to me, and it just continued like this. And I've heard stories of a lot of Koreans being very eager to learn English. So there's that aspect too, right? There's that aspect to it. And from my experience working with Horo, it's one of the players that I've enjoyed working with the most, because he gave me like information about how Koma does it. So that was like the beginning of where my idea started.
Did you learn any secrets? Did you steal anything good?
At that time, it was, what was the season? It was season 5, I think. Yeah, season 5, spring splits. The things that I was thought about at that time, what Koma does, like, yeah, he basically looks at the replay and then writes down times and then brings up the times and makes it quick and elegant. And I'm like, holy moly, I didn't think about this. and today, you guys are all laughing, but at that time it was like revolutionary.
Yeah.
Holy moly, this is what we're going to do. And then like at that time we were working with like Last Shadow, and it was eventually we parted the ways or whatever happened. I don't want to go into that. And it was still a journey, even though there was this entire MYM debacle. But my experience working with Koreans has been positive. In the end, to that point, to the question, I think communication, you have to look at it in European players too. Of course, there's always question marks when it comes to players.
Let's go back for a moment in history. Let's go back to the Forgiven lineup. The one where it was Ryu in the mid lane, it was Forgiven as the AD carry, they had Vanda, and obviously the remaining players, they had Odoamne and Jankos. Why do you think these teams never were able to make the LCS finals, or indeed win LCS, even though, at times they were considered a potential favourite? What do you think was wrong with them?
I think one of the problems with the Forgiven lineup that HK had was they literally only had one way of playing the game. That was the effective way, which was so much focused on like super strong early game, win lane, win game kind of strategy. And it was something even when talking to Prolly about it like last year, they kind of accepted this was the one style they could actually use, because I think behind the scenes, they struggle at actually maybe talking to each other properly, actually figuring out in terms of feedback, how could we play the game differently? So I think they just had to kind of commit to the one style with the players they had on the lineup. And to be fair, that was actually very successful for most of the time. So I don't blame them at all for just saying this is the one way we should do it. But I think one thing that's always been interesting to me is like Jankos specifically in playoffs and, in these super, super important games, there will be one best of 5 where he's literally going 10-0 every game and just he gets a great start and he just rolls with it and he has so much confidence and momentum. And then the next time he, has a bad game 1 and we just don't see Jankos in game 2 and 3 play like the guy we see in the regular season. So I have never personally worked with him, obviously, and Veteran, you might know more about behind the scenes Jankos, but it always felt to me like he's too emotional in the very important best of fives to actually be able to always reset and be ready for the next game if something went wrong.
How was the coaching relationship in terms of this problem here? 'Cause it sounds like it seems like it's something that's haunted probably for his whole career.
Sure. So probably, So probably it was never like we sat people down and were like, you do this, you do this, you do this, and this is what we practice for the week. But probably was bloody good at creating a game plan for the next week over the course of that week and during scrims. Like he was incredibly tactically sound when it comes to the game. And I thought it was a bit of a shame that he tried to put so much of our style last season onto Forgiven, because it was actually a very good style, and I fully credit Prolly with that from behind the scenes. And I don't think that this is another reason why I will never say it was any sort of strategical aspect when it comes to the game of why we would lose, because I feel like Prolly did everything he could with that. I feel like he knew much more about the game than all of his opposing coaches, and he was very good at setting us up in that manner. I think that all shot calling issues and stuff like that on the ground had to be fixed in like other ways, and I wish that all of those ways had worked. Maybe we could have just been a bit less stubborn about like moving to plan B or plan C, sure, but that's also somewhat on the players.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely say for sure that Prolly is the smartest coach like I've ever talked to when it comes to understanding the game itself, like the macro part of the game, and he's super, super good at that.
One thing that did surprise me, though, is like on the past episodes, anytime we talked about Shia, we pointed out that he has a fairly limited champion pool. It's just that once he gets those 2 or 3 champions, obviously that's when he has the massive pop-off games, and that's when everyone looks, and if you just only look at his ceiling, you'd think, what a great fucking mid laner. Isn't, in theory, one of your number 1 priorities when you play against WE, just do not give them Galio?
Yeah, Galio, Talia, for sure. Like, these are, I think she is, like, most effective champions because he wants to be inside lane. Like, he was initially a Twisted Fate main, so he just, like, has a really good sense for when he should be helping side lane, how to push out the lane, how to reset, like, these types of instances. So I think that, yeah, these are the types of champions he's going to gravitate toward the best and have the largest impact on. And yeah, he got these last 3 champions, and Guangdong is like his home province, and so he was able to perform really well on that stage. So good for him. Good job.
Yeah. Well, I also think Galio is like, you remember how Apto talked about Aurelion Sol, where there's all these boosted challenger players by Aurelion Sol? That's literally what Galio is in professional play. Is like, good people can play him and it looks fantastic. But if you're a boosted monkey in the mid lane and this other guy across the rift is better than you, this neutralizes that matchup to a point where that guy's going to be frustrated because you have TP and you have a semi-global ultimate in the middle of the lane. You're hard to kill, hard to gank. You have good gank assistance yourself, and then you scale. And when you group and you have a hyper carry, AD carry, you aren't punished for actually taking the farm as that AD carry when you group up.
Like, just to touch on the thing you said about the, like, whether you took the sub as the top laner or the jungler, the one part that I still don't get, like, I'd love to actually know what the real reason is, because, by the way, before someone's like, look, I've linked you to a Coma interview that Travis did, like, he doesn't tell us the real reason there for obvious reasons. But the reason why I would like to actually know why he made this move is because I even said this, go back on, like, a past episode, probably in the groups, before, I think it might have been the prediction one, and I told you 100% what would happen. It would start like this. They would always start with Peanut, then as soon as they lost a game, in would come Blanc. Well, at that point in time, if that, right, what you're telling me there is, if things go badly, I can only rely on this other guy. Then why is the first guy there?
Exactly.
Why isn't the other guy just there all 5 games? This doesn't make any sense. Why are you giving the first person a chance to fuck up? It's a best of 5. There aren't 3 games you can give away.
And there's this narrative, too. There's this narrative where people are like, he's going to watch backstage with Coma. I'm like, literally, you can do that and download this guy. You don't have to do it in the best of 5. I understand people play differently, like on the day. Go watch their VODs. Like, they're gonna do that anyway. You're gonna no. I don't think watching this guy game 1 and 2, and then they're gonna pick Ivor in game 3 is really gonna let you figure out his routes. There's different picks, different pressure points. As a jungler, you almost never start the first 5 minutes of the game exactly the same. Even close to exactly the same.
Unless your friend's Karen. But the point is,
like, there's one game where he was on Rise and he was basically like jungling for SKT as well as playing mid on Rise in like a losing matchup. And I was just like, holy crap. Like, this is not something that you typically see during the regular season out of them. And it's just one of those rare performances that you're like, wow, I feel really fortunate to be watching this right now because this is like phenomenal play. So
see, I have the opposite opinion. I actually love that SK Telecom and Samsung are doing as well, and this is why, because this is absolutely the worst set of Korean teams they've ever sent to Worlds. Now that we've seen what happened to Longju, especially, and the fact that SK Telecom probably still wins Worlds actually is even better, because if you know anything about how to truly crush someone's soul, you have to constantly drip feed them some hope every now and then, right? If they lose hope, then it's meaningless to just destroy their soul over and over again. I'm pretty sure even the demons in hell get bored of that in the pit. God, they know they're here, stuck in hell forever. But if they think they could get out, then that's when it gets exciting, right? So what you have to do is you have to let all these Westerners, and everyone's done it, be like, oh my God, look how close this fits game. Look, the gap is closing. It's like, the gap isn't closing. What happened was someone left a window slightly open. Next season, they will 100% change these lineups, probably get much better Korean teams. And there never was a gap opening. There was a window that was slightly open and someone went, oh, shit, what's that draft? Oh, well, house is still fine. I closed the fucking window and it's done now. So it's very unlikely the teams are going to be this bad next year.
I think there's something to be said when you're comparing what a lot of other Korean teams did this split to what Samsung did. It's basically like, nope, we're sticking to the same roster. The only thing we're doing is we are bringing in this younger kind of up-and-coming jungler in Haru, and you saw them work around that in the spring when Crown was playing really well. So I think there's definitely something to be said about Samsung's approach and the fact that they stuck with the same team, even though people were like, well, the names on paper aren't all that great.
You know, I've just actually realized a dream of mine that I hope comes true. Because it's like, here's the thing. The problem is the second half of this equation, when I describe it, you can't happen, obviously. So it can never happen, right? But now that Ambition is a jungler, and obviously in the modern world, Kha'Zix is actually a jungle champion now. My dream is that he plays Kha'Zix against SK Telecom sometimes. Sadly, obviously he can't be Nidalee on the other side of the equation because that's also a jungle champion now. But, and in this equation, he tries to do a risky evolution while he's hid like sort of half in a brush. And then maybe Faker could kill him. Because if that happens, I'll probably try and find a way to pinpoint that and reference it as many times as I can in the future. I think it would just be an important moment in league history, Probably in some senses connected to everything that ever happened, like the butterfly effect in many ways.
He did play Kha'Zix at this tournament, so...
Exactly. Like, I think this final for me just showed me how you have to always put as much context into thinking about how someone performed overall as you can. Because think about it this. Imagine that SK Telecom had gone out in the semi-finals, but in Game 5, and Faker had played really well, but they just lost the game, right? Everyone would be like, wow, Faker was just a total god at this Worlds, almost made no mistake, amazing games all the time. But actually, in a mad way, by hard carrying his team through 2 series and getting him to this point, that then allowed him to look fairly average, and people were like, oh, even Faker couldn't do well. Like, it just shows how there's a famous saying we have in English where we just say, like, no good deed goes unpunished, like, by carrying his team to the final when everyone shit the bed, he also looked kind of bad and obviously was crushed by the result.
In Season 5, I didn't think I was going to be coaching League anymore. I thought I'd retired for good. And so I basically did a lot of odd reviews on EU LCS because I was in Europe at the time. Just in my spare time, just, as you say, for fun.
Yeah.
Because
listen, I don't know why everyone. That's one of the. There's two. Here's a little side rant. Okay, so there's 2 things that piss me off. One is that everyone in the modern world, watches, for example, superhero movies, Marvel comic book movies. They watch science fiction shows. They watch comic books that are made into TV shows, and because of that, everyone in the world tries to claim the identity of nerd. Right? None of these people are nerds. Like, liking the Star Wars mainstream movies does not make you in any measure a nerd. That is not, like, there's a certain sort of, it's like the 12 tasks of Hercules, there's certain toils you must undergo and suffering that must occur before you are actually a nerd, It's not something you have choice, just vocationally decide you're going to do with your life, It's a path you're initially forced down, and then, as the great Trent Reznor said, the way out is through. So you just go through that into some other aspect of your life.
Hear me now, because the thing is, I wouldn't be able to get all the work I do without my brethren, the man dem, in the Skrilluminati, my Patreon community, because this video, like all of them on my channel, is kindly supported by Frisky, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Ahmed Hadjou, Jensen Goh, Tobias Bernasconi, Animosity, Torin, Tosh, and you know it, a special thanks always goes out to Jerky's Minion, who always has my back. Would you like to ask a question in my regular AMAs? Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest I could take in my work? Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming guests are going to be. Maybe you want to be part of those lengthy esports discussions I do with my top donators. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today, where? Via the Patreon link in the description box below.